Welcome to the Top Order podcast. It's This Week in Cricket time. We've got World Cup watch again. Squads are going to come thick and fast over the next couple of weeks. We've got some unretirements, so we'll talk Stokes, Brook, Atkinson, Archer and England squad balance. We'll also talk about Trent Boult's return to the New Zealand squad. That's been confirmed. Jamieson, Ravindra, a bit of squad balance there. And we'll also just talk a little bit about the South African weekend squad confirmed for the home test matches coming up. All on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, as we said in the intro, we have come off a diet of, pretty decent red ball cricket over the course of the last little while. We've had the Sixth Ashes Test played in Sydney last night.
I know, just when you boys thought you were out of this, suddenly you're back in, not friends again.
Well, exactly. So, the Matildas and the Lionesses playing last night in that what's been a scintillating sort of, a couple of weeks of the Women's Football World Cup. Yeah. Packed stadium in Sydney. It's been really, really well supported. But we're not a football podcast, so we won't talk about that. But
David Warner made a nice joke, though. I did enjoy.
He did, absolutely. Yeah, whinging about the ball changing, which did happen throughout the course of the game. Actually, the ball was changed many times.
Big impact, yeah.
But I guess the main thing, of course, the rain not saving Australia this time. But let's talk some cricket. Let's talk some cricket. We've got World Cup squads need to be announced during September. They can be changed right up to that deadline date.
Yeah, so right at the end of September. It's kind of still, I think we talked about it a little bit last week, wasn't it? It's a bit weird that they're naming them so early. But
the just-in-time World Cup, I think, is the way that this is all coming together.
Absolutely. If you name your squad up until the end of September, and they might let you know what the grounds are as well by that point as well. Yeah. But we have got an England squad for New Zealand One Day Internationals and T20s that's been announced, and probably the big news, certainly from my point of view in terms of what's popped up on my Twitter feed, has been the return of Ben Stokes. So his unretirement from One Day International cricket and his heroics in that 2019 World Cup final, probably getting a fair bit of press. Interested probably to get the neutrals' view on that, in terms of both of you being neutrals in this respect. Any real surprises when you look at that England squad?
I mean, on Stokes, I think it's the least surprising unretirement of all time, isn't it? Although I think what it did for me is I actually was having a bit of chat with someone else about retirements, a mate lately, because we were talking about Broad, and that we sort of got into a back and forth about the dream time to retire and all of that. And I basically said to him, I've kind of come around on all that stuff, and the dream time to retire is when you want to stop playing. Like, there is no like you should retire then or this time. And if he wants to come back and he thinks this is actually a pinnacle world event, that kind of warms my heart to think. We've talked many times about how I love the One Day World Cup. There's been a lot of calls of the one day, the one day format is kind of dying a little bit, and people think, okay, let's just have T20 and Test cricket or whatever. How do we kind of reinvigorate the one day format? But the players think this is worth like getting up for, back in the side for.
Yeah, I think it's worth going to the World Cup for. But I feel for Harry Brook, who's performed superbly well for England over the last 12 to 18 months, and now and I have nothing against Ben Stokes, but now because Ben Stokes has decided that he's going to unretire from One Day International cricket and make himself available, and England have picked him, that Harry Brook misses out on a chance to represent England at a World Cup, which I think for him is, he's got the rough end of the pineapple there a bit as far as I'm concerned.
And before you sort of delve into that, Binksy, am I right in thinking Stokes, from what I understand, is just going to play as a batter in this World Cup? Is that the thinking here?
Yeah, look, I guess this has been a sort of a little bit of a thing over the course of the last probably year or so with his knee. It's been very deliberately quiet almost around when he might bowl and when he might not bowl. And when you don't expect him to bowl, he pops up and bowls 14 overs off the reel. My understanding is he's got patella tendonitis, and the only cure for that really... or the cure that's been sort of prescribed is plenty of rest from impact and jumping activities. Okay. So, he's not going down the trampoline park, I would have thought, in his off-season, and he's not doing any basketball, I wouldn't have thought. But
yeah, he's probably not going to feature for England at Tumbling Conference 2024, right?
But it sounds as if golf and batting, is okay.
So twisting okay, jumping and landing not okay.
Look, again, you're the resident physiotherapist here, and I forget whose knee injury it was that you diagnosed from 500 meters away. But look, jokes aside, I think that's been the diagnosis for Ben Stokes. I don't know whether he will bowl. Certainly, if he's got the ability to get through 3 or 4 overs, that really helps in terms of balance. When it comes to, I think your comment around Harry Brook being probably the unlucky one. I've probably got a slightly different take. It actually reminds me a little bit of the 05 Ashes, where Kevin Peterson came into the side, and they talked a hell of a lot about it being as a replacement for Graham Thorpe. And the reality then was, A, Thorpe was injured, which wasn't really common knowledge at the time. And B, probably the conversation was actually more that it would have been Ian Bell that would have missed out. So look, not to sort of relitigate that. I think probably in terms of the way that this side has sort of transpired, it might actually been a conversation that it was a David Malan that was missing out, or potentially even a Jason Roy if Ben Stokes is coming in as a batter rather than a Harry Brook. My other take on it is as well, I think when we talk about one-day international cricket and white ball cricket, I think it's actually more formulaic, and it's probably more important to know your role and to have been in that role, dozens, if not, scores of times when you're going into a major tournament. So Ben Stokes, if he ends up batting at number 5, whatever game situation he goes out to bat in number 5 in that World Cup, he'll have been in it before. He will have either been in the, oh shit, we're 20 for 3 and the power play is not finished, or he will be in the, holy shit, we're 250 for 3 with 20 overs to go, or he'll be coming in when there's fireworks required for the last 10 overs. What we've not got to forget here is Harry Brook's only played 3 one-day internationals. Yes, from a record perspective, he's got a strike rate nearly 100. He's no slouch. But he hasn't played, I don't think, enough of those games to really understand the situations he's going to be in. And then I think the other thing would be David Malan would probably be the other player who can bat at 3 and has batted very successfully at 3.
He's got a great record.
And his record, the last 17 games, he's got 400s and 450s or something of that ilk. So he would have been really, really unlucky to miss out as well. The final thing, and Baldy, I know you're keen to get in, is I think England have named this squad, and then they've named the T20 squad as well for some T20s against New Zealand as well. And Brook's in that squad. So I think there's probably a couple of guys that are in that T20 squad that are going to play some cricket. And when we get to the stage of actually finalising the team or knowing who our injury reserves are,
I think they've already said. Luke Wright said I think that Harry Brook will go to India
alongside Jofra Archer, who's going to go as a travelling reserve. So I think that there's a chance that with an injury, or potentially with a serious lack of form through those New Zealand one-day internationals for someone like a Jason Roy, that maybe Brook's test match credentials and any performances in those T20s could see him find his way into the squad. I think the other thing to say is Harry Brook had a bit of a mixed, well, not even a mixed IPL. He had 100 and bugger all else. They may well have looked at that and gone pitches and matchups.
He had a bit of a mixed test series as well, actually. I mean, I know he sort of got a few scores, but I think those scores weren't convincing for a few of those occasions. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't when Harry Brook was here in New Zealand, you kind of thought, oh, like this guy can't do anything wrong. In this Ashes series, it was a bit more like, oh, okay, Harry Brook's finding his feet here still a little bit.
Until the Ashes series, he averaged 80 in Test cricket. So not a lot of players go up.
Now he's averaging 62, which is still not too bad.
Not a lot of players go up from averaging 80 in Test cricket.
Yeah, I beg to differ on that. I think he had a pretty decent Ashes series for a debutant, well over 300 runs and match-winning innings in Leeds. So we'll have to maybe disagree slightly on that one. The other interesting thing is Gus Atkinson into that squad as well. So I think I'll contradict myself a little bit and say, game situations. I think it's probably a little bit easier for a bowler because they're going to know where they're going to use him. I think he's very much probably just jumped ahead of Ollie Stone as someone that can bowl, in excess of 90 miles an hour alongside Mark Wood, who's been named named in that squad as well. So, almost you probably don't see both of them playing together. So, Gus Atkinson's probably there on the depth chart for Mark Wood, or a bit of, rest and rotation.
How out of the blue is this for you? Like, did you know of Atkinson? I've barely seen much of the 100. I've seen a few clips of him bowl. He's obviously got some gas, but he's not a name that I even knew of before the start of the series.
He wasn't even in the Surrey side at the start of this season, regularly. So 14 first-class games. He's played 40-odd T20s, very little list A cricket, so only 2 list A games. But has had a fantastic season for Surrey so far. And I think, they were talking about him as a guy that was, had a strong action. If he got into the setup, that would improve. And I think what you see now is with the S&C and being, centrally contracted, or at least in that bubble, so to speak, players do get stronger and quicker. He's actually done that probably quicker than they would have expected. He's playing in the 100 now, and he's been clocked at 94 miles an hour in the 100. So, look, again, if there's anything good that's come out of the 100, it's, that it's unearthed, but potentially a guy that's, that's on that depth chart for England above 90 mile an hour. Even if I think in the 100, a little bit like Australia, they turn the speed guns up for the home players and turn them down for the visiting players.
Fair enough. Just while we're on the 100 and depth chart, so when we unveiled Baldy's depth chart for the ODI World Cup and the test depth chart the other day.
Despite getting the dates wrong.
That's okay, that's fine. That's minor details.
It's only a year later.
Doesn't really matter. It's not important. What is important, though, is Spencer Johnson has been tearing up the 100. Bowled 20 deliveries the other day for 1 run, which I think is a record that will stand for a very long time.
It's going to be hard to beat.
He's only played 6 list A games for Australia. For South Australia. But he is now firming to be part of the World Cup squad for going to India, which is important because as I revealed prior to broadcast, Australia's never won a World Cup without a Queensland-based fast bowler in their squad.
Really?
Yeah. So Billy McDermott, 1987, father of now Billy the Kid's kid, Ben McDermott, who's a fringe Australian player. 1987, 1999, we had Adam Dale. Of course, the most economical bowler ever.
Chapman.
Yes, and then in 2003, Andre Bichelle, who famously saved Australia. 2007, I think... 2007. Mitchell Johnson, and then 2015 also Mitchell Johnson. So, and then the sprinkling of Shane Watson and Roy Simons in there as well for Australia. So if Australia are to win the World Cup, Spencer Johnson must go as a member of the Brisbane Heat and almost by proxy representing the finest state in Australia north of the Tweed.
Very, very nice. Back to England. Archer, I mean, it doesn't feel especially surprising that he's not in the squad. And I mean, he hasn't played for so long. Is there but again, it's sort of a bit like the Tanveer Sangha conversation we had last week. I know, very different kind of players, but they seem very they've already said, we're going to give him pretty much every opportunity. We're going to take him along to India and sort of hope that if someone gets injured, we can just slot him in straight away. It seems like they're obviously very invested in the skill and X factor, I guess, that he has if he's able to get himself fit again.
Yeah, well, you just need to watch him bowl to know that that's there. So I think the question really would be, it puts a lot of pressure on him, I think, if he's named in the 15-man squad. And, as resilient as you may be as a cricketer or a person, you're probably going to have some doubts that you're going to let your team down if you do pull up injured again. Whereas, I think almost being there with the squad, there's not a guarantee that someone's going to go down injured. But if someone does at the end of the group stages, or there's an opportunity to bring him in, then look, it's a scintillating prospect, and it's a nice, not a nice problem to have, because you'd probably want him fully fit, and you'd love to be picking from Wood, Atkinson, Archer, and going, look, one of you guys is going to miss out, and all of you can bowl above 90 mile an hour. So look, I think it's great that he's going to be with the squad. I think he's obviously got some experience in India. He's played obviously a little bit of IPL cricket, so he might be the kind of guy that's going to help that bowling group, or definitely will be the kind of guy that will help that bowling group, and maybe Atkinson himself. So look, I think it's great that he's in and around that environment. And I think the other thing that's come out through all this chat is just the way in which there's some sort of synergies with that Test series with Joss Buttler reaching out to Stokes potentially. Yeah. My conspiracy theory is when Stokes retired, he said, "Look, I'm retiring so that I don't have to answer the question about whether I'm going to play, and then if I'm in a decent state from a fitness perspective, of course I'll play in the World Cup." So I wonder whether that might be the worst kept secret in English cricket. The other fact is, I think the coaching staff and the captain very different if you look at their demeanours to the test test pairing. McCullum a bit more gregarious, Stokes definitely appears gregarious. Buttler just a little bit understated. Mott's very, very quiet, but I don't think you can doubt their steel. And any questions around the squad or the selection or the planning, I think are just way off base. England hold both trophies at the moment, so until they don't, that's probably when you start to question the decision-making process of the powers that be in terms of that white ball cricket, I think, for England.
And as we sort of segue to the New Zealand squads and stuff that have been named, I did think an interesting, not necessarily personnel decision that England made is around the balance of their side. They've picked 6 seamers for the squad, and when we looked at Australia's side, there's Hazelwood, Stark, and Cummins, and then it depends if you class Abbott as a seamer or an all-rounder, and then there's about 15 all-rounders as we talked about last week. But and then if you look at New Zealand, we're sort of the players that we've got to, we could take 6 seamers, but that feels like all those players are fighting for maybe 4 or 5 spots. I did think that was interesting, and even looking at Luke Wright's comments, he kind of touched on the fact we're having a lot of seamers. Basically you could argue if they were going with the same sort of setup as maybe New Zealand or Australia, they could have had a Will Jacks or a Harry Brook or whoever they wanted in place of Atkinson or one of these other seamers. But Luke Wright kind of pointed to the fact that there's 37 games in whatever it is, 9 games in 37 days, and that they're going to plan a lot of rest and rotation. And I suppose when you look through the England side, guys like Wokes and Topley and Wood and things, they're players that have injuries and don't seem to be able to play games on the bounce and bounce and bounce. So, yeah, I think that's a different approach, but we'll see how it works for them. And the fact that they've got so many names maybe means that they are going to give a lot of guys an opportunity to play, which might be quite different to what New Zealand do.
Yeah, the big surprise to me, or not surprise, is there's so many left armers in that squad as well. So yeah, I think that's quite odd, particularly because I think Willian, Curran is a shoe-in. I think Curran and Wokes, I think, really are going to provide that. Almost neither of them is probably quite a number 7, but they're both probably 7.5s. So I think that.
And I think one of them will be adding 8 probably anyway, because you've got Livingston, Ali.
Yeah, you got Moeen Ali.
So much depth,
so many options.
Yeah, so I
really
think
annoying.
Yeah, I think Livingston's probably the guy that misses out, and I think Joe Root might bowl a little bit at this World Cup as well, particularly if there is a little bit of spin in those pitches. Let's move on to New Zealand. So again, unsurprisingly, really, Trent Boult confirmed.
Oh yeah, I mean
that was a shoo-in, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, we've been talking about it for 9 months. I think that we expected him to go to this World Cup. I think most people by now sort of knew that was going to happen. But there's still the odd person going, oh, what if he doesn't? What if they stick to their guns or something and don't select him? But yeah, very nice to see him back in the squad. I guess nice to see him back in the squad for this warm-up series, I guess, against England. Because, yeah, we've talked about roles a lot. You want to get in, you want to get your roles going. And Trent Boult is obviously someone that's going to be in our starting lineup and someone that's going to be important for New Zealand if we're going to go far in this tournament. So, yeah, delighted to have him back. I think the question is now, he's going to go to this World Cup. Kind of what happens next after that will be the big question for, sort of watch this space for New Zealand, because we'd love to see him play other formats and play for New Zealand for a little bit longer. But yeah, we'll see if that happens after this. But yeah, just delighted to have him back in that squad.
And what about the balance of the New Zealand squad? I think Jamieson's had a few fitness concerns, but you would say he's in your best 11, wouldn't you?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Matt Henry ahead of him?
Absolutely. I mean, Henry's I think Henry's our second name on the team sheet in terms of the bowling lineup for the white ball stuff.
For the England series or for the World Cup?
For the World Cup. I mean, he's been absolutely brilliant for years, Matt Henry. He's been, when we went to Pakistan, obviously that was a different sort of squad. He shone way above everyone else. Even looking back to the last World Cup, Matt Henry was, one of our leading bowlers in that tournament as well. So, yeah, look, no questions asked if in my head that Matt Henry is above Southey, above Ferguson, above Milne, well above Jamieson. I actually think Jamieson, who's a good chance New Zealand playing UAE in the T20s starting tonight, overnight New Zealand time. So by the time this podcast comes out, probably has already been played. But I think what they're doing with interesting that they've named him for that series. They've named him for the T20s against England. Then they've named him for the ODI squad as well. My guess would be that he's no chance to go to this World Cup. I think he's a chance. This is like we're getting you back into the swing of things for New Zealand. If you look at his white ball record for New Zealand, it's not very good. If you look at how he went in the IPL, it's not especially good. He's been an absolutely brilliant test bowler. He probably hasn't had as many, he hasn't had as many opportunities to shine in white ball cricket. Maybe like a different situation, but maybe a little bit like Harry Brook in that, he's been around for a while, but sort of the white ball games, we've had a very settled side. We had, like I said, we've had Henry, Southey, Boult, Ferguson. Those four names, they've been a brilliant bowling attack for a long, long time in white ball cricket. So we didn't need Jamieson. He played in lots of different situations, but never really shone. And I don't think he's a huge chance for this tournament. But wonderful to see him back on the park for New Zealand because it's, I think he's going to be a very important bowler for us in the Test summer. And I think the importance of getting him back in the environment, getting him back just playing cricket again after a stress fracture is really important.
We talked a little bit about England's depth chart, Slippy. Jacob Duffy coming into the squad to replace Blair Tickner, who is going to stay at home with his newborn daughter. I'm guessing he would have known roughly when that was going to come. So
I think they were thinking he could. The baby would arrive and then Tickner would go. Baby arrived and Tickner's obviously said, "Look, I prefer to stick around." And look, I think there's going to be a lot of turnover in this next sort of couple of weeks for New Zealand because we've got this UAE series where we've got. We mentioned a few weeks ago, we've got the debut potentially of Dean Foxcroft. Yep. Same with Addy Ashok. We've got a number of different names. Cole McConkey over there, Dane Cleaver, Chad Bowes, loads and loads of players playing in this UAE T20 series. Then there's a bit of turnover. I think Mark Chapman and Jimmy Neesham have babies on the way, so they're going home. Ish Sodhi is going home for a bit of a break. There's players that are playing in the 100 there joining the squad. Some of these other players are going home. So there's going to be a lot of turnover. I think the England ODI squad is the one that we should really pay attention to in terms of like what is New Zealand going to do for the ODI World Cup, because that's the one that actually looks a lot more settled. There's 4 players missing from that, and in Chapman and Neesham, who I just mentioned, Sodhi as well, and Kane Williamson obviously not in that squad. But I think if you looked at that 15 that is named, that's probably the squad plus those 4 that are, those 19 names are fighting for the 15.
And Lippy, any updates on Kane Williamson? I know you've probably got a few alerts set up if his name appears in any media. What have you seen this week?
He's got alerts set up for elbow in Google as well. any mention of elbow?
Oh, look, I mean, I would say probably slightly more positive than last week, but I still think it's going to be pretty tough. He's already said that I think they play some warm-up games against Bangladesh just after the squad's been named. It's interesting. I don't know how they're going to play it, because basically if you name you can name your injury replacements, right? But you can't really take Kane Williamson as an injury replacement, because then what are they going to do if he gets fit, like Will Young or Rachin Ravindra or Mark Chapman or whoever it is kind of in that mix? Are they going to go, oh, I've done my hamstring, I'm out for the tournament now?
Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting question, right? Can you name Kane knowing that he has a pre-existing serious injury and then have him not be fit for the tournament? How does that work?
Then pull him out and say he's not an injury replacement anymore because he's injured?
Yeah. Or name him in the squad and then
guess
pull him
they
out
could
if he's not fit.
I guess they can. I mean, well, that would be my guess, that you can name him. They'll name him in the squad, and then, if they decide 4 games in that he's not going to make it, they can pull him out and say. But as soon as you pull someone out, they're out for the whole tournament.
Correct,
so
yeah.
that's the risk that they would take. I do think for New Zealand that they, as we talked about with England, they play a lot of. England may be planning to rotate their bowlers a lot. New Zealand, for years, have played a very traditional kind of, we're going to get set up we're going to find our best 11 and we're going to just play them unless someone's got a bit of a niggle or unless conditions are different and we need 2 spinners or, 4 seamers or whatever it is, the balance of the side needs to change because of the pitch conditions. We're just going to play our side and we're going to build on our roles and we're going to know exactly what we're going to do so that by the time we hit the semi-finals, we're going to be rolling and ready to go. And I guess that suits... you can carry a couple of players, right? If you're only planning on playing 12 or 13 throughout the tournament and the other guys are just sitting there, if they're thinking, okay, well, we're going to have, a pretty settled batting lineup. We've got a choice maybe between Will Young and Mark Chapman. Possibly they can both go if Kane's not fit. If he is fit, maybe they have to decide between one of those 2 guys or a Neesham or a Ravindra. There's a lot of permutations.
The all-rounder permutations are the one that I think is going to make it really interesting for New Zealand. And it's the same for Australia, it'll be the same for England. Which combinations of all-rounders do you take to augment your 3 or 4 bowlers? And that's why the Matt Henry, Southee, Boult question becomes really interesting because Australia are staring down the same possibility of only playing 2 seamers. You've got Josh Hazlewood's the number 2 ranked ODI bowler in the world right now, and on the fact that you probably won't drop Pat Cummins as captain and Mitchell Starc has a ticket for life effectively to open the bowling for Australia in white ball cricket, he might be the one to miss out. So,
and he's a weak link with the bat as well.
Who's that, Josh Hazlewood?
Yeah.
Well, you probably can't carry Hazlewood and Zampa in the same side, right? Because they are to England.
I think they will. I said this last time. I think that you must have 6 spinners in your lineup is sort of being a bit overblown. And you see it in the England side. They've got some players that can bowl spin in Ali.
But Australia don't.
And you've got Maxwell. You've got, Travis Head and Smith are very borderline on that.
That's the problem.
But
right?
I think
you've
Maxwell
got to get 10
can do a
overs
job.
out of that. But you've got to get 10 overs of Maxwell and Smith and Head if you're going to bowl extra spin, or you bat Ashton Agar at 7, which is, well, in my mind, 1.5 spots too high, but for most pundits, probably half a spot too high for Ashton Agar. So lots of questions around balance of the all-rounders, and I think that will be the interesting thing when these squads are named for true coming into the World Cup.
The spin options. Talking of spin options for New Zealand, we want to talk a little bit about that Ratchin Ravindra, I think. So if you look at the squad for the England ODIs, you've really only got him and Santner to provide that spinning. Okay, you're going to maybe throw Glenn Phillips at me, but realistically it is those 2, both left arm sort of spinners. What does that look like? We mentioned Ish. And again, do we really see spinners being as important as historically it would have been on an Indian World Cup?
I think New Zealand's ideal lineup, I mean, yes, jump in.
Leg spinners. Leg spinners have been doing awesome in the IPL for years and years. So wrist spin, I think, is the key in India.
Yeah.
Even though you have a look at the Indian national side, they're all...
Kuldeep will probably be there.
Kuldeep and Yuzvendra Chahal might be there, but their traditional strength has been Akshar, Ravindra Chandra Ashwin, Jadeja, right?
Yeah.
So they're all finger spinners, Michael, so shut up. But I genuinely think wrist spin is going to be important to have an Adil Rashid, a Zampa,
Sodhi. Sodhi's a lock to be in that squad
100%.
as long as he's fit. And I think our ideal lineup includes Ish Sodhi as well. And I think that's why the seamers are really the ones fighting for the spots here, because I think that you're going to have Santner and Sodhi in the lineup every single game for New Zealand is my expectation. And then you're going to have 3 seamers fighting for those spots. So look, I mean, if you run through that New Zealand lineup, you've got that ODI World Cup squad for England. You've got Allen, Conway, Young, Mitchell, Latham, Phillips, Santner, Henry, Southee, Ferguson, Boult is probably the lineup I think they'll go with as their top 11 in that World Cup, in that ODI lineup against England. Then you've got Milne, Jamieson, Ravindra, and Nicholls. Those 4 guys I mentioned before, Sodhi, Neesham, Chapman, and Williamson to come back in. As I said, I think Jamieson goes straight away. Sodhi comes back in. Nicholls will go. I'm sort of staggered that he's in that squad, but due to a number of different players being in and out. I guess the hope for New Zealand is that means Williamson comes back in, and that means you've got 2 spots left. Or if you are going to bring in Chapman, it's probably Will Young or Finn Allen if they really want. I feel like they've invested too much time in Finn Allen to not take him.
Yeah,
but
they've invested a lot of time in Will Young as well.
Exactly. So you've probably got looking at Chapman, Young, and Allen fighting for 2 spots, and then you've got Neesham and Ravindra. If you're Neesham and Ravindra, and then maybe Milne and Ferguson, kind of, you sort of can't fit all of those guys in. So I think Ravindra is closer, and he's got the opportunity in these 3 series to actually sort of put himself ahead of probably a Jimmy Neesham or a Chapman. I think the thing that holds Ravindra back, a couple of things. Santner is a very similar bowler, obviously, and a much better bowler.
Yeah,
and being a left-arm spinner. And also, I don't think they see Ravindra at this stage as a player who can come in and be a specialist batter replacement.
Yeah,
the way they've brought him into these sides, it's always been batting at 6, batting at 7, batting at 8.
And arguably Santner, with his experience, is a better option batting down there, and he's by a country mile a better spinner. In fact, I think he's one of the most underrated spinners in one-day cricket.
You'll hear no argument from me on that point.
Let's finish the pod. We'll get back to red ball cricket. There is a segue that's around the white ball stuff, which is the SA20 is going to run from January the 10th to February the 10th, 2024, which clashes with that New Zealand series. So I think, knew that this was going to happen, that there were going to be a number of players that would prioritise the white ball cricket South Africa owned tournament. Let's not forget that. So they're going to be without some pretty significant players.
Would you like the list of them? Yeah. So Tuesday, the CSA chief executive Folitsi Moseki, I apologise if I've pronounced his name incorrectly. So no contracted players in those 6 T20 franchises that are owned by their IPL affiliates will go to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Which means the South African Test side will subsequently be without Temba Bavuma, Aiden Markram, Kagiso Rabada, Heinrich Klaassen, Rassi van der Dussen, Lundi Ngidi, Marco Janssen, Onrik Nokia, Keshav Maharaj, and potentially a whole bunch of other Test candidates that could be snapped up in the auction that happens at the end of September.
Right. I think even Dean Elgar was in that auction last year and picked up by someone.
Yep. Right. So basically their captain and their frontline bowling attack as well as most others,
as well as all of their attacking,
pretty much all
options.
their team.
Yeah. So anyone in South Africa who can strike at about 100 or can bowl the cricket ball is not going to go to New Zealand.
Right. I did see a few funny comments basically saying, why don't they just round up some South Africans that live here? Because there's quite a few of them.
Well, I'm just wondering whether I've got a link. I could get a game. Look. I guess disappointing, but it was always going to come, wasn't it? I think that there's going to be some clashes. And priorities changed. And look, I guess particularly given the amount that South Africa, or Cricket South Africa, I think as they're called, have put into this T20 tournament, and they're desperately trying to get some money into the coffers, aren't they?
That's the rhetoric. The rhetoric from Cricket South Africa is they need this tournament to be financially successful.
Yep.
And I don't know how the commercials work because the teams are owned by IPL franchises, so I don't know what the revenue sharing model is, but the rhetoric from Cricket South Africa is that if this tournament is successful, that they can push money back into grassroots and first-class cricket in South Africa, which, if you read the Fox Sports article in the news this week, is on life support at best. So if cricket in South Africa from a first-class perspective is to come off the breathing machine, it needs this tournament to be successful. Unfortunately, the success of this tournament will be at the expense of their Test side.
Well, an expense of the World Test Championship, which, I guess from a New Zealand point of view, we've never beaten South Africa in a Test series. I very happily would take 2-0 in the series and bank the points and all of that kind of stuff. But as you say, it's disappointing. These would have been 2 marquee series for New Zealand. We've got South Africa at home, Australia at home, like teams that we traditionally love to play against and get,
and would have good support coming out to New Zealand.
You'd have really good support, yeah. I guess, look, makes it really easy for us to pick which test matches we're going to go to, though, right?
Yeah.
with Australia here as well.
And that's the sad thing for New Zealand fans and for South Africans living in New Zealand, of which there are many, is they won't get to see their first choice side come and play. And it's going to be an ongoing problem for South Africa because they have very little international cricket scheduled. I mean, only I think Afghanistan and Ireland have less international cricket scheduled going forward, again, per Fox Sports this week. But look, something needs to change, and I'm hopeful that we don't look back on this as a watershed moment for the downfall or the steady demise of the priority given to international cricket.
Well, look, good segue to, I guess, the end of the podcast. I think listeners and viewers of the pod, if you've got any suggestions for how to save Test cricket, we are going to be recording an episode on that in the coming weeks. So,
and what's wrong with it?
Yeah, and what's wrong with it, if anything. So, look, drop whatever your viewpoint, drop it in the comments, whether that's on YouTube, on Facebook, in our Twitter feed. We're on Threads now, Instagram. I think, we're everywhere. We're even on X, aren't we?
Yeah.
That's the
formerly known as
social media platform as opposed to the drug.
Still not on TikTok. We don't do the dances.
I don't think that would be wise.
Having heard you sing the Sunrisers song, I think it's probably a smart decision for all concerned.
Fair.
So, look, a good place to end the pod. We will be back next week. We've got a bunch of episodes planned. So, Cricketing Hall of Fame.
We'll finally finish it?
We'll finally finish it 4 years after it started. How many players on that list have retired since? We'll do a little bit of a count of that. We'll obviously have more news on World Cup squads as they're announced as well as we lead into that. And then, of course, we just mentioned earlier in the podcast, New Zealand playing some international cricket tonight as well. So, we'll cover all that next week. But for now, it is good night and good bless from us all here in Auckland. We'll see you next week on the Top Order podcast. Good night.